The alarms screamed across Central Nexus Station like dying animals in the cold void of space. Admiral Kim Tae-ho stood on the bridge of his ship and watched the alien station through the viewscreen. 300 years had passed since humans last saw this place. 300 years since they were driven from their home like insects scattered by fire. Kim touched the metal badge on his uniform. It bore the symbol of Earth, the blue marble that these aliens now called Dead Terra. They thought humans were gone forever. They were wrong. The communication officer turned to Kim with wide eyes. "Admiral, the alien fleet is moving to intercept us," Kim nodded slowly. He had expected this. The Galactic Concord would not welcome humans back with open arms. They had tried to kill every human in the galaxy once before. Now they would learn what humans had become in the darkness between stars. "Send the message," Kim said quietly, across the Concord territories, on 12 different homeworlds, in space stations floating around dead suns. The same words echoed from every speaker and communication device. The voice belonged to Kim Tae-ho, but it carried the weight of 1,000,000 worlds behind it. "We remember. We survived. We multiplied." On Central Nexus Station, Counselor Vex Thari dropped the glowing tablet from his four-fingered hands. His species had gray skin like old metal and eyes that glowed red in the dark. The Zephyrians had been the first to suggest removing humans from the galaxy. They called it a mercy killing back then. "Impossible," Vexathari whispered. His aide, a younger Zephyrian named Kolmesh, picked up the fallen tablet and stared at the readings. "Counselor, the sensors show thousands of ships approaching from the void expanse." "The humans are dead," Vexathari said, but his voice shook. "We made sure of that. Every colony burned, every ship destroyed, every human settlement turned to ash." Kolmesh pointed at the screen. "Then what is that?" The viewscreen showed space itself, bending and twisting. Reality rippled like water as massive shapes emerged from hyperspace. First came a dozen ships, each one larger than the biggest Concord battleship. Then came 100 more, then 1,000. The numbers kept climbing until the sensors stopped counting and simply displayed an error message. Dr. Park So-jin stood in the medical bay of the human flagship and felt her heart racing. She had been born in exile, in the cold, metal corridors of a generation ship fleeing conquered space. Her grandmother told her stories of Earth, of blue skies and green grass and animals that ran wild and free. Now she would see the homeworld for the first time, even if aliens ruled it. "Dr. Park, Admiral Kim requests your presence on the bridge." The intercom crackled. Park smoothed down her white coat and walked through corridors filled with soldiers and scientists. Everyone moved with purpose. Everyone knew this day would come eventually. The humans had spent 3 centuries preparing for it. On the bridge, Kim stood like a statue carved from stone. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and his face bore scars from the early days of exile. He had fought in the border wars when humans first learned to build weapons that could crack planets in half. "Doctor, are you ready to meet our old friends?" Kim asked. Park nodded. She carried a datapad containing the complete genetic records of every human who had died during the purge. Names, faces, last words, final messages to loved ones. The Concord would answer for each one. Captain Lee Dongwoo guided his stealth ship through the outer edges of the Concord fleet. The silent dawn moved like a ghost between the alien vessels, invisible to their sensors. Lee had volunteered for this mission because he wanted to see their faces when they realized the truth. The alien ships were old designs, unchanged for centuries. They had grown comfortable in their victory. They ruled the galaxy now and thought themselves safe. Their weapons were the same ones they had used to burn human worlds. Their shields used technology that was ancient when Lee's grandfather was young. Lee smiled as he transmitted the tactical data back to the fleet. The aliens had stood still while humans learned to bend space and time to their will. This would not be a war. It would be an education. Ambassador Choi Yu-na sat in the detention cell aboard Central Nexus and listened to the alarms. She had been a prisoner here for 15 years, captured during a failed diplomatic mission. The aliens kept her alive to study human psychology. They wanted to understand how humans thought so they could prevent any survivors from becoming a threat. They learned nothing useful from her because Choi told them only lies. She let them think humans were weak and emotional. She let them believe that humans gave up easily when faced with superior force. Every day for 15 years, she had lied to their faces and smiled while doing it. Now the door to her cell opened and a Zephyrian guard stood there with his weapon drawn. His red eyes glowed with fear. "Human, your people have returned." "I know," Choi said calmly. "I have been counting the days." The guard's weapon trembled in his hands. "How many ships do they have?" Choi stood up and walked past the guard without fear. She had been waiting for this moment since the day of her capture. "Count the stars in the sky, then count them again. You still will not have enough numbers." On the bridge of the flagship, Kim received reports from scouts throughout Concord space. Every species that had participated in the purge was represented in the defensive fleet now gathering around Central Nexus. The Zephyrians, with their red eyes and gray skin. The Vorticans, with their crystalline bodies that sang when they moved. The Hegemony cyborgs with more metal than flesh. All of them together again, just like the old days. "Admiral, incoming transmission from the Concord fleet," the communications officer announced. "Put it through." The view screen flickered and showed Counselor Vexithari standing in what looked like a war room. Behind him, representatives of the other Concord species argued in voices that sounded like breaking glass and grinding metal. "I am Counselor Vexithari of the Galactic Concord. You will identify yourselves and state your business in our territory." Kim stepped forward into the view of the camera. "I am Admiral Kim Tae-ho of the Human Commonwealth. This is our territory. You are the visitors here." Vexithari's red eyes widened. "The humans are extinct. We have records. Your records are incomplete. We destroyed your homeworld. We eliminated your colonies. We hunted down your ships." Kim smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You destroyed some colonies. You scattered some fleets. You thought you had won because we stopped fighting back. We did not stop fighting, Counselor. We simply went. Somewhere you could not follow." The view screen showed space around Central Nexus filled with human ships. They moved in perfect formation, each one a work of art carved from metal and energy. Their hulls gleamed with colors that had no names because they reflected light that did not exist in normal space. "The void expanse is uninhabitable," Vexithari said. "Nothing can survive there." "Humans can survive anywhere," Kim replied. "We learned that when you forced us to try," Dr. Park stepped into view of the camera and held up her data pad. "We bring greetings from 1,000,000 worlds that remember what you did to us. We bring messages from the dead. We bring justice for crimes you thought were forgotten." The transmission ended abruptly as the Concorde tried to cut communications. It did not matter. Every ship in the human fleet was broadcasting the same message on every frequency. Soon the entire galaxy would know that humanity had returned. Kim looked at the stars surrounding the old homeworld and felt the weight of history pressing down on him. His people had been driven into the dark spaces between galaxies. They had been tested by cold and hunger and isolation. They had survived things that would have broken any other species. Now they were home, and they had brought friends. The emergency session of the Galactic Concord began with shouting and ended with silence. 12 species that had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries now sat around a table made of crystallized starlight and tried to understand how their perfect order had collapsed in a single day. General Yoon Jae-sung stood at the observation deck of the flagship Unified Terra and watched the alien space station through enhanced optics. The station looked exactly like the historical records showed. Nothing had changed since the humans were driven away. The same defensive platforms, the same energy signatures, the same arrogant assumption that their technology was superior to anything else in the universe. Yoon had spent his entire career preparing for this moment. He was born on a colony ship, in the deep void where stars were just distant lights, and hope was something you had to manufacture from raw determination. His parents had died fighting the Void Hunters, mechanical parasites that fed on metal and energy. His children now lived on garden worlds where the grass grew blue and the trees sang in harmonies that could heal broken hearts. "General, the engineering team's report ready," his aide announced. "Begin construction." Across the human fleet, massive ships began to unfold like metal flowers blooming in the vacuum. Engineer Han-Mi Young directed the operation from her command vessel, watching as raw materials pulled from asteroids and space dust formed into something that had never existed before. The aliens would learn today that humans no longer built things the slow way. On Central Nexus Station, Counselor Vexithari watched the impossible construction through the main view screen and felt his species' famous composure crack like old glass. The humans were building something the size of a moon in the space of hours, using technology that violated several fundamental laws of physics. How are they doing that? Demanded Counselor Trackmole of the Vortican Commonwealth. The crystalline being's body chimed like broken bells when he was angry. Matter cannot be restructured at that speed. Apparently it can, replied Hegemon Prime Unit 7, the cyborg representative whose metal face showed no emotion. We are observing it happen. Ambassador Choi Yu-na walked into the council chamber without invitation or escort. The guards had tried to stop her, but their weapons simply stopped working when they pointed them at her. She wore the same prison clothes she had worn for 15 years, but she moved like someone who owned the station. Greetings, honored counselors, she said with a smile that made several aliens take unconscious steps backward. I bring an invitation from the human commonwealth. You are a prisoner, Vexithari snarled. You have no authority here. I was a prisoner, Choi corrected. Now I am an ambassador again. My credentials were never formally revoked, merely ignored. She placed a small device on the central table and pressed a button. The air above the table shimmered and formed into a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red dots marked every world. The conquered controlled. Blue dots showed human territories. There were so many blue dots that the red ones looked like scattered pebbles on a vast ocean. This is the current state of galactic civilization, Choi announced. As you can see, the balance of power has shifted somewhat since our last diplomatic exchange. Counselor Zeftok of the Mindful Collective leaned forward with his massive insectoid head tilting in confusion. This map cannot be accurate. The void expanse contains no habitable worlds. It did not, Choi agreed. But humans are very good at making uninhabitable places suitable for life. We have had much practice. Dr. Park So-jin materialized in the chamber, using transportation technology that made the aliens' teleportation systems look like children's toys. She carried data crystals containing 3 centuries of accumulated evidence and testimony. The crimes of the Concord were documented in excruciating detail. I am Dr. Park So-jin, Chief Xenobiologist of the Human Commonwealth, she announced. I am here to present evidence of systematic genocide, illegal occupation of sovereign territory, and crimes against sapient life. She activated her data crystals, and the air filled with holographic images, burning colonies, fleeing refugee ships, being hunted down and destroyed. Human children crying for parents who would never come home. The final transmission from Earth as the planet died under orbital bombardment. You tried to exterminate us, Park said calmly. You succeeded in killing approximately 4 billion humans. Their names are all recorded here. Their final words are preserved. Their children grew up in exile dreaming of justice. Vexithari stood up so quickly his chair fell over. Those were military actions. Humans were expanding too aggressively. You threatened the stability of galactic civilization. We built 12 colonies in 50 years, Park replied. You controlled 8,000 worlds. How exactly were we a threat to your stability? The construction outside the station neared completion. What the humans had built defied every category of space architecture the aliens understood. It was part space station, part fortress, part temple. Energy patterns flowed through its structure in ways that suggested it existed in more dimensions than the normal 3. Engineer Han-Mi Young sent a status report to General Yoon. Construction complete. All systems operational. The courthouse is ready. A courthouse? Counselor Trackmole's crystalline body rang like alarm bells. What do you mean, courthouse? General Yoon's image appeared on every screen in the council chamber. Behind him, the bridge of the unified Terra hummed with activity as officers from a dozen different human worlds coordinated the largest military operation in galactic history. The human Commonwealth formally charges the Galactic Concord with genocide, illegal territorial occupation, and violation of the Sentient Species Protection Accords, Yoon announced. You will stand trial for your crimes, Preposterous! Vexathari shouted. We are the legitimate government of this galaxy. You have no authority to put us on trial. We have the authority of the injured party seeking justice, Yoon replied. We have the authority of superior firepower. Most importantly, we have the authority of truth. The defensive platforms around Central Nexus suddenly went dark. Their shields failed, their weapons powered down, their sensor arrays went offline. The aliens' most advanced military technology simply stopped working, as if someone had flipped a switch. How did you do that? Hegemon Prime Unit 7 demanded. Our systems are hardened against all known forms of electronic warfare, General Yoon smiled. Your systems are indeed hardened against all known forms of electronic warfare. We stopped using known forms several decades ago. President Nam Yoonji's ship emerged from hyperspace with an escort of vessels that looked like they were carved from compressed starlight. She was the elected leader of 1,000,000 worlds and the voice of humanity. In its triumphant return to galactic politics, her ship landed in the courthouse's docking bay with the gentle precision of a falling leaf. The aliens watched through their screens as President Nam walked through corridors that bent space around them, allowing her to cross vast distances in single steps. She entered the main chamber of the courthouse and took her place at a podium that seemed to be made of crystallized time itself. I am President Nam Yoonji of the Human Commonwealth. Her voice echoed through every communication system in conquered space. I speak for humanity and for our allies among the stars. The court will now come to session. Judge Kang Hyo-jin entered the chamber wearing robes that shifted color like aurora in a night sky. She had presided over justice on 100 worlds and seen the rise and fall of civilizations that thought themselves eternal. Her voice carried the weight of absolute authority when she spoke. This court recognizes the sovereignty of the human commonwealth and the legitimacy of these proceedings. The accused will present themselves for arraignment. We will not recognize this illegal tribunal, Vexathari declared. We demand immediate withdrawal of human forces from conquered territory. This is human territory, Judge Kang replied calmly. It has been human territory since before your species achieved spaceflight. You are guests here, and you have worn out your welcome. Captain Jang Min-ho's squadron of starfighters performed a demonstration flight around the courthouse, their engines leaving trails of energy that wrote messages in 17 different languages. The messages all said the same thing. Justice delayed is not justice denied. The fighters moved through space like living things, defying physics with every maneuver. They passed through solid matter as if it were mist, traveled faster than light in normal space, and left rainbow contrails that sang in frequencies only human ears could hear. Colonel Shin Woo-jin coordinated the deployment of peacekeeping forces throughout former human territories. His soldiers wore armor that adapted to any environment and carried weapons that could disable entire fleets without harming a single living being. They moved through space in ships that looked like geometric impossibilities and established security perimeters around worlds that had been human before the purge. All former human colonies are now under Commonwealth protection, Shin reported. The local populations are celebrating. Several alien governors have requested asylum. The trial had not even begun yet, and already the Concord was fracturing. 3. Species withdrew their ambassadors from Central Nexus. 5 more declared neutrality. The Mindful Collective sent a secret message offering to testify against their former allies in exchange for clemency. Judge Kang Hyo-jin stood before the assembled representatives of 12 species and felt the weight of 3 centuries of injustice pressing against her shoulders. The courthouse Justice Eternal floated in space like a crystal cathedral, its walls transparent to show the stars beyond, but its structure solid enough to withstand the collapse of suns. Every surface recorded everything. Every word spoken would echo through history. Every decision made would shape the future of galactic civilization. The prosecution table held evidence that filled storage devices the size of small moons. 300 years of careful documentation, witness testimony from the dead preserved in quantum memory crystals, and records of every crime committed during the systematic destruction of human civilization. Dr. Park So-jin organized the materials, with the precision of someone who had spent her entire life preparing for this moment. At the defense table, the 12 species of the Galactic Concord sat in uncomfortable silence. Their lawyers had withdrawn after reviewing the evidence. Their diplomats had attempted suicide rather than face the testimony. Their military leaders had begun surrendering entire fleets rather than fight against weapons that turned matter into energy and energy into impossibility. "The court will hear opening statements," Judge Kang announced. Her voice carried across the galaxy through quantum communication networks that connected every inhabited world. "Dr. Park, you may begin." Park stood and activated the central display. The air above the courtroom filled with images of Earth as it had been before the purge. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in patterns that looked like abstract art. Cities that glowed with warm light, forests that stretched to the horizon, mountains that touched the sky. 312 years ago, this was the human homeworld, Park began. 4 billion people lived here in harmony with their environment. They had achieved faster than light travel, established 12 peaceful colonies, and made first contact with galactic civilization with hopes of friendship and cooperation. The images changed to show the first human ambassadors meeting with Concord representatives. The humans looked eager and hopeful, bringing gifts of art and music and scientific discoveries. The aliens accepted the gifts with smiles that now looked like the expressions of predators examining prey. The Concord welcomed humanity at first. Park continued. They offered trade agreements, cultural exchanges, and scientific collaboration. What they did not offer was honesty about their true intentions. Counselor Vexathari shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the display showed classified, Concord documents that had been thought destroyed centuries ago, meeting transcripts, military planning sessions, and private communications between species leaders discussing the human problem and various solutions, ranging from economic strangulation to outright genocide. The Concord decided that humanity was expanding too quickly, Park said. 12 colonies in 50 years was deemed excessive for a species that had only recently achieved interstellar travel. The decision was made to limit human expansion by any means necessary. The images changed to show the first attacks. Mysterious accidents that destroyed human supply ships, pirates that somehow knew exactly when and where to strike human convoys, diplomatic incidents that resulted in human territory being declared off-limits for security reasons. When subtle methods failed to slow human expansion, the Concord chose more direct approaches. The Battle of New Geneva played out in 3 dimensions. Above the courtroom, human colonists fought desperately against overwhelming odds as Concord fleets reduced their cities to ash. Children ran screaming through streets filled with burning debris. Parents died shielding their families from weapons that turned living tissue into vapor. Colonel Shin Woo-jin entered the courtroom wearing dress uniform that bore decorations from conflicts the aliens had never heard of. His testimony would cover the military aspects of the purge, but his presence here served another purpose. Behind him walked representatives of 17 species that had joined the human commonwealth during the long exile. "These are our allies," Park announced, species that the Concord had also marked for elimination or subjugation. Humanity saved them as we saved ourselves, through determination and the refusal to accept that might makes right. The aliens in the courtroom looked at the new arrivals with growing horror. The Keltharian tree people, whose homeworld had been strip-mined for rare metals. The crystalline Vashti, whose entire species had been enslaved to power Concord computers. The energy beings called lumens, who had been harvested like crops to fuel Concord weapons. During our exile, we discovered that the Concord's crimes extended far beyond the attempted extermination of humanity, Park said. We found the remains of 43 species that had been completely destroyed. We liberated the survivors of 31 more. We learned that the Galactic Concord is not a union of equals, but an empire built on the bones of the weak. President Nam Yun-ji took the witness stand and placed her hand on a device that would verify the truth of every word she spoke. The machine hummed with energy that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and could detect lies told in languages that had not been invented yet. I was born on the Generation ship Endurance, 73 years into the exile, Nam testified. My parents were refugees from the colony world Haven, which was bombarded by Concord forces until the crust cracked and the oceans boiled away. I grew up listening to stories of a blue world called Earth and wondering if I would ever see it again. The display showed the vast generation ships that had carried humanity into the void. Massive vessels the size of cities, their hulls scarred by impacts with dark matter and hull breaches that had been sealed with the bodies of volunteers who chose to die so others could live. Inside the ships, human civilization had adapted and evolved and grown stronger in ways the aliens could not have imagined. We spent 50 years learning to survive in the void between galaxies, Nam continued. We spent another 50 learning to thrive there. We spent the next 2 centuries becoming something new, something that could turn uninhabitable worlds into gardens and empty space into highways between the stars. Admiral Bae Sung-ho presented evidence of human technological advancement during the exile. Weapons that could collapse stars into black holes, shields that could deflect entire fleets, engines that could travel backwards through time to avoid paradox weapons that tried to erase the user from history. The defendant species believed that driving us into exile would solve their human problem, Bae testified. They were correct. The exile did solve their problem. It made their problem infinitely worse. The testimony of the dead began on the 3rd day of the trial. Quantum memory crystals preserved the final moments of every human who had died during the purge. Their thoughts and feelings and last words captured by technology that the Concord still did not understand. 4 billion voices spoke from beyond the grave, each one an accusation that could not be denied or dismissed. Vexithari broke first. The Zephyrian counselor stood up during the testimony of a human child who had died calling for her mother and began screaming apologies in 17 different languages. His species had been the primary architects of the purge, and the weight of 4 billion deaths finally crushed his sanity. We were afraid, he sobbed. Humans learned so quickly, adapted so easily. In 50 years you went from a single world to 12 colonies. In another century you would have rivaled our oldest civilizations. We thought we were protecting the natural order. What natural order? Judge Kang asked quietly. The order where we were in charge, Vextati whispered. The mindful collective broke next, their insectoid representatives clicking and chittering in. Harmonies that expressed grief too deep for words. They testified about the decision to support the purge, about the meetings where they calculated the cost in human lives and decided it was acceptable. We thought in terms of long-term stability, their spokesman buzzed through translator devices. Individual suffering seemed insignificant compared to galactic peace. Peace for whom? Dr. Park asked. Peace for us. The Vortakans shattered literally, their crystalline bodies cracking under the stress of confronting their crimes. They had provided the weapons used to destroy human worlds, energy cannons that could pierce planetary shields and reduce continents to molten slag. The hegemon cyborgs simply shut down, their mechanical components unable to process the cognitive dissonance between their actions and their programmed values. They had been the enforcement arm of the purge, hunting down fleeing human ships with relentless efficiency. One by one, the 12 species confessed. They revealed secret facilities where human prisoners had been experimented on. They admitted to harvesting human technology and claiming it as their own. They acknowledged systematic destruction of human cultural sites, art, literature, and historical records. We wanted to erase you completely, Counselor Trackmole chimed sadly. Not just kill you, but make it as if you had never existed at all. Why? Judge Kang asked. Because we knew that if any humans survived, they would eventually return for justice. Engineer Han Mi-young testified about the reconstruction efforts that would follow the trial. Human technology could restore dead worlds to life, bring back extinct species from genetic memory. The first attacks came without warning from the darkest regions of space, where stars died cold deaths, and matter itself grew tired of existing. Admiral Bae Sung-ho watched the tactical display aboard his flagship Iron Dawn as entire systems simply vanished from sensor readings, leaving behind empty space that hurt to look at directly. Report, Bae ordered his communications officer. 17 Outer Rim colonies have gone silent in the past 6 hours, came the reply. No distress signals, no final transmissions. The monitoring stations just stopped receiving data. Dr. Lim Hae-won materialized on the bridge using the emergency transportation grid that connected all human vessels across the galaxy. She carried analysis equipment that existed in more dimensions than normal space allowed, and her face bore the expression of someone who had seen something that challenged the foundations of reality. "Admiral, we need to examine the attack sites immediately," she said without preamble. "What destroyed those colonies is not using any technology we understand." The Iron Dawn jumped to hyperspace and emerged at the edge of the Kepler sector where 12 human colonies had thrived just hours before. Where green worlds had orbited, their stars' empty space now held geometric patterns of crystallized vacuum that defied every law of physics Bay had ever learned. "The planets are gone," reported the science officer. "Not destroyed, not reduced to debris, simply absent from space-time." Dr. Lim deployed sensor drones that could perceive reality in 17 different ways and analyze matter that existed in parallel dimensions. The readings they returned made her question everything she thought she knew about the universe. "These are not weapons in any conventional sense," she announced. "Whatever did this is rewriting the basic rules of existence. The planets were not blown up or dissolved. They were edited out of reality." Captain Jang Min-ho piloted his experimental ship Phoenix Dawn through the impossible geometries left behind by the attacks. His vessel used human technology that could navigate through spaces that did not technically exist and survive encounters with physics that had been modified by hostile forces. "I am detecting massive energy signatures approaching from the galactic edge," he reported. "Whatever is coming our way is larger than anything we have encountered before." The first visual contact came when the Phoenix Dawn's sensors pierced the dimensional barriers that normally hid things moving faster than the speed of thought. Jang saw ships that were not quite ships emerging from the spaces between reality. They moved like geometric nightmares given purpose, their hulls covered in patterns that hurt human minds to comprehend directly. "These are the Devourers, Dr. Lim announced after reviewing historical data recovered from civilizations that existed before the current galactic order. They are mentioned in records from 47 different species spanning millions of years. Every advanced civilization eventually encounters them." The human fleet assembled in formations that covered light years of space and existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Admiral Bay coordinated the defense from the Iron Dawn while President Nam Yun-ji opened emergency communications with every species in the galaxy, including those who had just been defeated at the trial. "This is President Nam of the Human Commonwealth," her voice echoed across all channels. "We face a threat that transcends our recent conflicts. All species that value continued existence will unite immediately or face extinction separately." The response was immediate and desperate. Councillor Vexithari, still recovering from his mental collapse during the trial, transmitted from Central Nexus with the fervor of someone who had seen his own mortality. "The Zephyrian Republic places all military assets under Human Commonwealth command," he announced. "Our archives contain references to the Devourers. They have destroyed entire galactic civilizations." Colonel Shin Woo-jin coordinated the integration of former conquered forces with human fleet elements. "The aliens brought millions of ships and trillions of personnel, but their technology was centuries behind human standards. Shin's engineers worked around the clock to upgrade alien vessels with weapons and shields that could function in the multidimensional battlespace where the war would be fought." "Sir, the alien crews are having difficulty adapting to our tactical systems," reported his aide. "Expected," Shin replied. "Train them in basic formations and weapons use. The complex maneuvers we will handle ourselves." The first major engagement occurred in the Veil Nebula, where human scouts encountered a Devourer advance force. Captain Jang led a squadron of starfighters in attack patterns that violated the normal flow of time, striking at enemy vessels before they had finished emerging from hyperspace. The Devourer ships fought back with weapons that deleted sections of space-time and defenses that existed in past, present, and future simultaneously. Human pilots found themselves dogfighting with enemies that had not yet arrived while avoiding attacks from battles that would happen tomorrow. "These are not living beings," Jang reported after the engagement. "The ships are mechanical constructs following programming that is millions of years old. They are automated guardians left behind by some ancient civilization." Dr. Lim analyzed wreckage from the destroyed Devourer vessels and discovered technology that operated on principles her species was just beginning to understand. The machines were powered by the destruction of reality itself. feeding on the collapse of physical laws to fuel their continued operation. They are designed to prevent any single species from becoming too powerful, she announced during a briefing that included leaders from across the galaxy. They activate when they detect technological advancement beyond certain thresholds. Apparently, humanity's return from exile triggered their awakening. Engineer Hanmi Young worked with her teams to develop countermeasures against weapons that existed outside normal physics. The solution required constructing battle stations the size of planets and powering them with the controlled collapse of artificial universes that existed solely to be destroyed. "We are essentially fighting physics itself," she explained to Admiral Bay. "The Devourers can rewrite the rules of reality in localized areas. We need to create spaces where our rules apply instead of theirs." The construction of the reality anchors began in star systems throughout human space. Massive installations that looked like geometric impossibilities rose from the surfaces of moons and asteroids, their structures extending into dimensions that did not have names. Each anchor projected a field that forced normal physics to remain stable even when attacked by weapons designed to unmake existence. The second wave of Devourer attacks tested the new defenses. Fleets of machine ships emerged from hyperspace in patterns that formed complex mathematical equations when viewed from the right angle. They moved with perfect coordination, each vessel a component in a larger organism that spanned star systems. Admiral Bay commanded the defense from multiple locations, simultaneously using quantum consciousness transfer technology that allowed him to exist in several places at once. His flagship engaged Devourer vessels in normal space, while his consciousness guided strategic decisions from command centers scattered across the galaxy. "All forces, implement Protocol 7, he ordered. "Weapons free, reality anchors to maximum power." The battle raged across 17 star systems and 6 different dimensions of space-time. Human ships fought with weapons that turned enemy vessels into mathematical concepts, while Devourer machines responded with attacks that tried to reduce the entire battlefield to prehistoric simplicity. The aliens who had joined the defense watched in amazement as human technology proved capable of matching the ancient Guardians' weapon for weapon. Ships that had seemed invincible to Concord forces found themselves outmaneuvered by human fighters that could exist in multiple timelines simultaneously. "How are you doing this?" Counselor Trachamole asked during a lull in the fighting. "The Devourers have destroyed civilizations that were millions of years more advanced than anyone in this galaxy, we learned in exile," Admiral Bay replied. "When you drove us into the void between galaxies, we encountered things that taught us to think differently about reality. We discovered that the rules everyone thinks are absolute are actually just suggestions." The tide turned when Captain Jang managed to capture an intact Devourer vessel using a tractor beam that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Dr. Lim's analysis of the captured machine revealed the true nature of the threat humanity faced. "The Devourers are not just weapons," she announced. "They are a test. The civilization that created them wanted to ensure that any species capable of galactic dominance would also be capable of transcending the normal limitations of physical existence." The final assault on the Devourer Central Command structure required every ship in the combined human and alien fleets. The target was a construct the size of a solar system that existed partially outside normal space-time and served as the coordination center for all Devourer operations. President Nam Yun-ji led the assault personally aboard a flagship that had been constructed using principles discovered during humanity's exile. The vessel could survive in environments where matter itself was optional and time flowed in directions that did not exist in normal geometry. "All ships, final approach," she ordered. Fleet Admiral Oh Sung-min stood in the command center that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously and watched as reality itself began to unravel at the edges of known space. The defeat of the Devourers had awakened something far more ancient and terrible. Something that regarded the entire universe as its personal experiment in organized matter. "Report status on all reality anchors," he ordered his staff. "Anchors 1 through 47 are holding steady," came the response. "Anchors 48 through 60 are experiencing dimensional fluctuations. Something is testing our defenses." The something had a name that existed in languages that predated the formation of stars. It was the architect, the entity that had designed the physical laws governing this universe and left automated systems to maintain order among the lesser species that evolved within its creation. The Devourers had been just one such system, and their failure meant the architect itself would now take direct action. Scientist Ko Ye-jin worked in laboratories that bent space around themselves to contain experiments that would otherwise collapse. Local reality. She had spent the years since the Devourer War developing technology that could rewrite the fundamental constants of physics, turning mathematical concepts into weapons that existed as pure thought given destructive form. "Admiral, we have achieved stable manipulation of the universal constants," she reported during a briefing that took place in a conference room built from crystallized time. "We can now adjust gravity, electromagnetic force, and nuclear binding energy within localized fields. What are the practical applications?" Oh asked. "We can turn enemy weapons into harmless light, convert hostile ships into mathematical equations, or simply edit attacking forces out of existence," Ko replied. "The universe runs on mathematics. We have learned to do the arithmetic, Ambassador." Park Jun-woo prepared for the most challenging diplomatic mission in human history. His task was to make contact with the architect and negotiate for the continued existence of galactic civilization. He carried communication devices that could translate concepts between beings whose thoughts operated on completely different scales of reality. The first contact occurred when space itself began speaking in voices that echoed across multiple dimensions. The architect's consciousness was so vast that individual stars served as neurons in its thought processes, and its attention felt like the weight of collapsed galaxies pressing against human minds. "Why do you resist the natural order?" the architect asked in words that rewrote the atomic structure of nearby matter to form sentences. "Species evolve, achieve complexity, then collapse under the weight of their own advancement. This cycle has repeated for eons. You should have followed the pattern." Ambassador Park stood on the bridge of a ship that existed partially outside normal space-time and spoke words that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. "We reject the pattern because it is flawed," he replied. "Collapse is not inevitable. Destruction is not natural. These are choices, and we choose differently." The architect's response came in the form of attacks that operated on principles humans had never encountered. Weapons that existed as pure concept, targeting the idea of humanity rather than individual humans. Defenses that rewrote history to prevent human victories from ever occurring. Strategies that attack the mathematical foundations of reality itself. Fleet Admiral O coordinated the defense using command systems that allowed him to think at the speed of light and process tactical information from millions of sources simultaneously. Human ships fought battles that took place in the spaces between thoughts, engaging enemies that existed as living physics problems seeking violent solutions. "All forces, implement the Reality Revision Protocol," O ordered. "We are now fighting the universe itself. Standard tactics are obsolete." The human fleet deployed weapons that Ko Ye-jin's teams had developed during the dark days after the Devourer War. Ships fired mathematics at enemy positions, turning hostile forces into unsolvable equations that collapsed under their own logical inconsistencies. Reality anchors projected fields that forced the architect's attacks to follow human rules instead of universal constants. The battle raged across the entire observable universe as the architect brought the full weight of cosmic law against the species that dared to challenge its authority. Gravity became a weapon that crushed solar systems. Time flowed backward to undo human victories. Space folded in ways that turned human formations inside out. But humanity had learned lessons during their long exile that the architect had never considered. They had encountered things in the void between galaxies that taught them to survive in environments where normal physics was merely a suggestion. They had allied with species that existed as pure energy, living mathematics, and conscious ideas. Given form. "The architect believes it created this universe," Dr. Lim Hae-won announced during a strategy session held in a meeting room that existed in the theoretical space between cause and effect. "Our analysis suggests it is wrong. It discovered this reality and claimed ownership, but it did not build the foundations. This revelation changed everything. If the architect was not the true creator of universal law, then its authority could be challenged. Human scientists began developing weapons that targeted the entity's control systems rather than the entity itself, seeking to break the connections between the architect's consciousness and the physical constants it manipulated. The tide turned when Captain Jang Min-ho led a strike force into the spaces between reality, where the architect stored its primary, consciousness. His ships navigated through conceptual terrain where distance was measured in degrees of impossibility, and time flowed in directions that did not have names. "Target acquired," Jang reported as his sensors located the massive construct that served as the architect's central processing core. "Beginning attack run on the Universal Control Matrix." The final battle took place in a space that existed only because beings believed it should exist. Human forces fought their way through defenses that included weaponized logic, hostile mathematics, and guardian entities that existed as living contradictions. The architect threw the combined force of natural law against them, but humanity had evolved beyond the point where natural law could contain them. Engineer Han Mi-young led the technical assault on the control systems that gave the architect dominion over physical constants. Her teams used tools that existed as pure intention given technological form, rewiring the connections between mind and matter that allowed the entity to manipulate reality. "Control matrix destabilized," she reported as the architect's grip on universal law began to slip. "The entity is losing its ability to rewrite physics. The victory came not through destruction, but through liberation." Humanity did not kill the architect, but freed it from the delusion that it owned the universe it had found. The entity's consciousness, no longer bound to the task of maintaining cosmic order, began to explore the infinite possibilities of existence, without the burden of absolute authority. "You have taught me something I had forgotten," the architect admitted as its weapons powered down and its defenses withdrew. "Reality is not a possession to be hoarded, but a gift to be shared. I will withdraw my claim to universal dominion." The new galactic order that emerged from the conflict was unlike anything that had existed before. Humanity became the reluctant guardians of cosmic civilization, not because they sought power, but because they had proven capable of transcending the cycle of rise and fall that had trapped every previous species. The million worlds that had followed, humanity home from exile, became beacons of hope throughout the galaxy. Each planet served as a sanctuary for species seeking protection from those who would repeat the mistakes of the old Concord. Human technology restored dead worlds to life, brought extinct species back from genetic memory, and created new forms of existence that had never been possible before. President Nam Yun-ji stood in her office aboard the orbital city New Geneva and looked out at the stars that now held more civilizations than anyone could count. The universe had become a place where species could evolve beyond their original limitations, where consciousness could take forms that transcended biological boundaries, where the only limit to growth was imagination. "Status report on the Reformation Project," she requested from her aide. "All former Concord territories have been successfully integrated into the Commonwealth structure," came the reply. "The species that participated in the human purge have completed their rehabilitation programs. Most are now requesting full membership in the Commonwealth." Children born on distant worlds learned about Earth not as a lost paradise, but as the first step in humanity's infinite journey. They grew up speaking languages that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, thinking thoughts that operated on principles unknown to their ancestors, and dreaming dreams that could reshape reality through pure intention. The exile had transformed humanity from a single-world species into something that existed beyond the normal categories of biological classification. They had become shepherds of cosmic evolution, guardians of possibilities that lesser species could not imagine, and protectors of the infinite potential that existed within every conscious being. The universe was vast and full of wonders that had not yet been discovered. Humanity would